Does anyone remember Jens Tuve? He was a Finnish radio DJ on my local station. I used to listen to his show back in '04. I had to make a lot of late night runs back then, and he was the twilight DJ. Pretty standard radio host, just chilled out conversation with a few callers, and discussion about topical events and issues, with the occasional bit of music. The reason I highlight this is because there was nothing weird about him or his show. He was inoffensive and level-headed, never said or did anything out of the ordinary for a radio host. Then, one night, I was listening into his show. It was the same as always. Jens was chatting with one of the callers, when out of the blue, somebody, presumably his producer, entered the room and said to Jens, "We need to go, now." I distinctly remember hearing Jens reply with, "Are you serious?" There was a pause before Jens simply said, "Okay." The caller was cut off immediately. You could even hear him leaving the room in a hurry. I stayed tuned, and after a couple of minutes of dead air, the station started playing music. It was weird because he didn't sound surprised. He didn't even ask why they needed to leave, like they were expecting it or something. It wasn't an illegal station or anything. After that night, some new host took over, and Jens's name was never mentioned again. It was like he just vanished. If you Google him, nothing comes up. I can't find any information about what happened to him, or even anything before his disappearance. Nothing on YouTube either. So, either someone's covering something up, or he wanted to disappear. But that doesn't explain why his entire existence seems to have been wiped from the internet. I know I'm not the only one who remembers him, since people would call into his show. I know his audience was small and probably quite old, but I thought there would at least be some kind of forum discussion online. But there's nothing. So, if anyone has some answers to what this was all about, I'd really love to know. I was driving home really late one night on some country roads in the middle of a storm. I was going super slow because while I know the roads very well, I could hardly see anything. Even going slow, I was still worried because the weather was just that bad. All of a sudden, on this pop station I normally listen to, the song playing cut out, and a completely different song came on. I actually recognized it, but it's a weird song I would never expect to hear on a station like that. A Pod Is Waiting by I Monster. Good song, but not in this situation. It started up near the end of the song, when the music goes kind of messed up, and this mournful wailing starts up in the background. The line, "When your time has come, it's come," came on right as my car hit a massive dip where a chunk of the road had completely broken off, and I very nearly went flying into the ditch on the side of the road. I missed rolling my car by the skin of my teeth, and I guarantee I would have been seriously hurt, if not straight up killed, if my car had fallen there. The whole situation scared the hell out of me, and afterwards, the radio station went right back to normal, playing dumb pop music. I've never heard that song or any other by that band on that station again. I have no idea if it's the most perfect coincidence of a potential station mess-up, or something else. But that was by far the scariest thing I have personally heard on the radio. Early yesterday morning, at around 2 AM, while I was listening to my local radio talk show in Southern California, some strange shit happened. I work at a scrapyard overnight right now, basically just monitoring the premise for extra money, and so the radio was a good friend to keep me company. The host was doing a bit on the worst way anyone's ever broken up with you, and a few callers were ringing up about their funny experiences. Throughout the broadcast though, I could faintly hear someone in the mic, or maybe in the background of the mic, telling the host about what to do. It happens often when the showrunner passes a story to the host or whatever. You can hear their comments briefly. Well, she was talking intermittently about a story that was breaking locally, with, as she put it, some extremely odd circumstances. At one point, she said several officers were engaged and had gone missing. She said there were shots fired as well. 2 or 3 police codes came up during the half hour or so, and the host would repeat it back to her. And then, all at once, it just stopped. The signal dropped. The station went silent except for crackling, and after a few minutes it came back up. They apologized for the broadcast going down, and then went on with the show as normal. Except they never mentioned the story again, and I haven't heard anything about it since. I wasn't alone though, because a caller rang in a little later about the dating segment, and asked what the deal was earlier. They didn't even acknowledge it. Maybe a hoax, maybe just a fluke, maybe something weirder. Who knows? Back in 2005, I was waiting for my husband to end his shift at the Goodwill he worked in. It was close to Halloween, and the local radio station was on, and they were taking calls from local people, talking about their haunting experiences. Me, being into the paranormal, perked up and started listening. The first call I heard was a man who lived in Elkton, Maryland, a place I used to live. He talks about living in a townhouse and having all kinds of freaky stuff happening. You know, voices, moving things, stuff like that. He then goes on talking about Pan Am Flight 214. In December of 1963, lightning struck the plane, sending it crashing to Earth, killing everyone on board. It crashed in Elkton, Maryland. What makes this story so creepy to me is that he describes where the plane crashed, and that was where his townhouse was. They had built a development on that site. The hair raises on the back of my neck because back in 2001, I was 19 and homeless, staying at different friends while I saved money. One friend's house though, I couldn't really stay at. I could never sleep there. No matter what I did, every time I went to fall asleep, something would wake me up. Voices, bangs. My friend lived in that development that they built over the crash site. I asked her about her experiences there, and apparently she has noticed weird shit happening at her house, but she's a lot more religious than me, so in her mind she's not really allowed to talk about it. It's funny that now there's a memorial for the people who died there. I know it wasn't there back in 2001. This wasn't a radio broadcast, but rather something we heard and saw over a baby monitor, which is a sort of radio, I guess. I was at a friend's house one night, and she was putting her little boy to bed. Her baby monitor had a camera built in, and was installed at the foot of the crib. She also had one of those mattress sensors in the crib. Well, we're sitting down, just watching a movie, and the receiver for the monitor is on the coffee table in front of us. The sound sensor spikes, and the screen goes white. She picks it up, and all you can make out on the screen is an eerie face. We go running into the room, and her kid is sound asleep. We look around and don't see anything strange, so we go back to the movie. About 10 minutes later, the same thing happens. I get up quickly and sneak into his room, while she stays on the couch. I catch the kid standing up in his crib, with his face right against the monitor. He's smiling like crazy and giggling. He looks over at me, and quickly lays down and acts like he's asleep. I let her know what's up, and she laughs it off. A few nights later, she tells me the exact same thing happened to the monitor, but her boy was sitting on the couch next to her at the time. I don't know if you've heard of number stations, but they're radio stations that broadcast a string of numbers, sometimes a data transmission. They're thought to be covert messages to spies, but no one's really sure. I've heard one live from Cuba, nicknamed Spanish Lady, because it's a woman's voice reading off strings of numbers in Spanish, with some data bursts in between groups of numbers. On YouTube, you can hear some creepy recordings of some other well-known ones. Some of them are no longer on the air, but there's one where the beginning of the broadcast is a really creepy music box sounding song, and then there's the voice of a young girl just reading off numbers. Something about it is super creepy. Downtown Washington, D.C., back when the Conelrad stations would broadcast that long tone over the radio. Well, it comes on, and instead of saying this has been a test of the emergency broadcast system, the radio instead says, "Stand by for an important broadcast." I was in sight of the Washington Monument. If missiles were on the way, I was going to be cinder in less than 15 minutes. For about 30 seconds, I pondered what would happen next, and it wasn't fun. Then the announcement that there was a fire at the DC Police Armory, and that a 2-block radius near it would be blocked off or evacuated. Talk about relieved. Worst radio message I ever almost heard. My great-grandmother was mentally unstable. She would see thousands of ants crawling on the walls, hear voices, etc. I was a kid, and she was living in an apartment, soon to be moved to an old folks' home. She claimed her radio would start talking to her, telling her what she was wearing, and saying awful things about her. Well, my mum made note, but thought it was more of her mind slipping. However, my mother and myself stayed with her for a day. We were watching TV, and the radio was playing in the kitchen, when all of a sudden, this creepy, cackling laughter came over it. It laughed, began telling my grandmother she was crazy, and how she would always be alone for the voices to get her. I ran screaming to my mum, who was standing on the back porch. She heard it, and immediately called the cops. Long story short, my great-grandmother's neighbor was an ex-military guy who got a kick out of tuning into her radio frequency and terrorizing her. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I thought it was a nice little change of pace to what we usually go with here. Not the typical horror stories, but I don't know, they're quite creepy. How about you guys? Have you ever had any weird radio experiences yourself? Ever heard any weird transmissions or whatever? And what do you think about these ones that I've just narrated? Are they hoaxes or something a bit more sinister? Let me know down in the comments below. And yeah, make sure to obliterate that like button as well, you dirty little swines. Stay spooky. And remember, the best things happen in the dark. No matter what I did, every time I went to fall asleep, something would wake me up. Voices, bangs, telephones ringing.